It's Cardboard Time, episode number 106, and I'm your host, Arwen Kathke. On today's episode, we are chatting about Canopy, Evergreen, and Endeavor Deep Sea. And to do that is my wonderful guest, who I always love chatting with, the ever wonderful Roberta Taylor. Hello.
Doing really well. How about you?
Other than the cold and snow and frigid temperatures that keep persisting, I'm existing. I'm here.
Yeah, this is the time of year when winter feels like it's overstayed its welcome.
Mm-hmm. I could use some spraying. Not quite enough spring that I have to start mowing the lawn, but, enough spring to make things just feel nice. I don't have to freeze walking Charlie. I think that would be fantastic.
Here's hoping soon.
Yeah, it would be nice. So we did have a couple of games that we wanted to talk about. The first one that I'm going to go into is Canopy Evergreen. This was from 1 to 4 players in 45 to 60 minutes. Designed by Tim Eisner, the art is by Vincent Dutrait, and published by Weird City Games. Underneath the dense canopy of the Pacific Northwest rainforests, a thriving ecosystem exists. Schools of salmon swim upstream, wildflowers and lush ferns dot the mossy floor, and a gray wolf looks for its next meal. In Canopy Evergreen, players compete to grow the tallest trees, collect sets of wild plants, and create bountiful habitats to help the native animals thrive. In the game, players take turns selecting new cards for their forest from 3 growth piles. Each time you look at a pile, you may select it and add those cards to your rainforest tableau, or return the pile face down, adding 1 additional card to it. As the piles grow, you must search for the plants and animals that'll benefit your forest the most, but choose carefully, as mingled in with the flora and fauna are dangers in the form of fire, disease, and drought. After 3 seasons, the player who has grown the most bountiful rainforest wins. I'm sorry. Roberta, I thought I was talking to Carla for a minute. It's been a day. Roberta, have you heard of this one?
So I think I've played Canopy, the first one, which sounds very similar, and it sounds like they've relocated this to a temperate rainforest. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things here is it's a standalone game, so it is in that kind of Canopy universe. But there's some new rules that are added to it. You actually have like a forest board as opposed to getting the cards that you're just building the trees up. Those become actual physical trees after you turn them in. And on that board, you also have these bonuses that you get to unlock as long as you have trees of a certain height that are both next to each other. You get to unlock the bonus that's in between those. And they also have some wildlife that kind of interacts with one another, which was a lot of fun for me. It was the kind of thing that I picked it up at PAX Unplugged after talking to Tim about it. And I like the original quite a bit. I love the theme on it, right? But ultimately, I wound up giving that to some friends because it wasn't quite, the game that I wanted it to be. I wanted a little bit more meat to it. Mm-hmm. And this seemed like it was going to provide that. So I wound up picking this up. I think a lot of the fun in this kind of came from those scoring conditions that you were unlocking. You had the wildlife cards, which all had scoring conditions on them. So if you got like a certain amount of flora or, a certain amount of animals, you would get extra points when it came time to scoring everything, which was a lot of fun. I thought the 3D nature of the game was kind of fun too, with the trees and you're building up this board. It did make for a very visually appealing board. But at the same time, it was a little bit difficult to, kind of count up the height of those trees when it came to scoring and when it came to, determining who had the highest tree. It got to be a little bit cumbersome as well. So I was a little bit mixed about that. One thing about this game, and a prelude to one of the games that you're going to talk about, was the eco-friendly packaging that this had. So the basically the paper sleeve that was on the outside as opposed to the plastic was a bunch of tuck boxes that held all the components really nicely. Nice. So we love seeing that. And I think one more tuck box to kind of separate the animal meeples from the tree components would have been nice, but I thought that it was a really well thought out organization system. I'm really kind of digging more of the eco-friendly solutions as opposed to the plastic. I think that we're able to do just as much, if not more, with some of these more eco-friendly, packaging solutions.
Yeah, no, I have to say there's this delight when I open a new game and find that they've put that kind of thought into it and it doesn't have like just a ton of plastic baggies. Because, yeah, it's better for the environment, but also it's just so satisfying when it all just fits in just right. Like, I don't know, it makes my heart happy.
It's really nice, that they've used the available space really well. It hasn't like become this big monstrosity of a box that has all this empty space. You just feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah.
I guess that's a thing.
I think so. And it's actually really interesting because I recently got Leaf, which I think...
That's theirs.
Is that theirs too? Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you get the game, the box doesn't actually, like when it's in shrink, which it's not, it's just sealed with those nice stickers that peel off. The punch boards actually hold the lid up, and once you've punched the game and put everything away, it actually shuts all the way properly.
I love that.
And it's just like... someone went, wait, this doesn't matter. This will still function. And once it's on your shelf, you'd never know they did that. And I thought it was really smart.
Roberta, have you noticed that a little bit more in the industry as well? Like a lot of these companies are kind of starting to go that route. I've seen a couple of games I've gotten in recently that do have that little bit of lid lift, but just fit ever so nice once you get everything punched out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have about a ton of new games, but I suspect that a lot of these companies are like working with the same few folks who are getting really good at figuring out the logistics of that packaging, because you sort of see commonalities like, this seems to work well, so it'll show up in a different game or whatever.
Yeah, I love seeing it. I love seeing new solutions, and especially when it's better for the planet. That is amazing. A couple of final notes about the game from a color vision perspective. I didn't have any issues with it. Everything was denoted by symbology, which made it really nice. So I was able to play with no issues whatsoever. I will, kind of say that the print might be a little bit hard for those with lower vision to read on a couple of the cards. But for the most part, it should be fairly accessible. So my final thoughts on this. This did exactly what I wanted it to do. I provided a little bit more on top of the fun mechanics of Canopy. Really like the theme on it. Love the eco-friendly packaging. That was great. This one's staying on my shelves. Looking forward to playing it more. Also has an excellent solo mode. I'll throw that in there too. So that was Canopy Evergreen. And Roberta, you've got a game that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I'm not as beautifully prepared as you with all the full-on details, but we've really been enjoying Endeavor Deep Sea in my home, and it does have. I believe it plays to 5. Yeah, there's 5 sets of bits in it, and a solo mode, which it also has, interestingly enough, sort of defaults to a kind of a campaign mode, like you can play it in order, but there's also a co-op mode and a solo mode, all playable with all the levels in the campaign, which I think was really clever. And it's interesting because my house doesn't tend to love co-ops, but playing it through, you really start to see the appeal of this would actually be really brilliant co-op, because so they built this out of the Endeavor Age of Sail, which was a remake of the original Endeavor, but in order to step away from the colonial theme and whatever, they basically rebuilt this game from the ground up. But it still has that amazing feel that the original Endeavor had, where you're at the beginning of the game, how am I going to do anything? I've got so little actions. And then by the end, you're like, oh my goodness, look at all the stuff I accomplished. How did this happen? And, it also has that brilliant thing where you always wish there was one more round, which I think is, without it being there wasn't enough game, you're just still enjoying it at that point. And you're like, oh, I want to, go a little deeper in the ocean and see what else we discover. Or I really want to finish whatever this other thing I'm chasing down. So, yeah. And they absolutely knocked it out of the park with the eco-friendly packaging. Like, they used the, I don't even know if it's a cellulose or what. It's kind of like a heavy, shiny, better quality egg carton, or it's not egg carton at all, but like it reminds me of that. And so it's all biodegradable, and everything has got its place, and you just take out your little tray and pull the cardboard sleeve off and you're ready to play, which I love. So yeah, those are, and it's just also something so cool about, like, as you explore the ocean, you add another tile. And so you start with just the surface and you get to see how far. And if you never get down to the deepest depths of the ocean, that game, you're left just wondering, well, what is down there, right? And you just want to play it again to see if you can discover some more. So it's really clever that way.
I really like that mechanic because it was something that left me feeling like I have to get down to this next level. Like, we have to do this before we stop playing. So it was a little bit of an incentive. And of course, like, some of the best incentives are down there at that lowest depth, you know, that you're reaching. And it just gets you to be more powerful. And you have these, like you said, this exceptional, like, last turn where it's like, oh, I've got all these possibilities, which is such a different conversation from what you're having with yourself and your friends at the table when that game begins, because it's just so limited. Yeah, that was one of my top games of last year because it was just so incredibly well done. And, you know, like you said, stepping away from that colonialism theme also really kind of boosted it up quite a bit. I love the story there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it was a really good decision, and just the work that must have gone into just rethinking every single part. And then, of course, you know, coming out of Burnt Island, the detail, like, one of the missions we just played, it's all about, like, ecology and doing conservation, and the little bonus board where you put your chips is shaped like a turtle. There's no need for it to be shaped like a turtle, but it's just so delightful, anyway. Right? Yeah, like that they themed it to that, and it's just like those little details really go a long way to make you, like, just really show the care that was put into that game.
Yeah, and that is absolutely true. Just the amount of care and attention, you know, that's from a retheme standpoint, for something to feel like it was always designed to be that system and that theme and be that well integrated, I think says a lot for the amount of time and effort that was put into that game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm sure we're going to get it to the table a lot more times because, yeah, it's just been brilliant.
Geez, now you make me want to play it again.
Right.
Which I've actually been doing. I've actually been going and playing some of the games that I want to revisit in my collection. So might be on the short list. Did you want to talk about Let's Go to Japan at all?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. That was, I think, the newest game that we've got to the table here at the house. And it was of interest because one of my housemates was just in Okinawa in the fall doing some stuff with karate. And when I saw that at PAX Unplugged, I was like, okay, I have to carry this home. And it's really quite delightful because it is set up like you're planning and then taking this little trip. And especially the first few times you play it, you're like reading all the cards and like really getting a sense for like why you might go to these cities. It has you visiting Kyoto and Tokyo and going back and forth between them if you're disorganized many times a day, which isn't good for you. Points
so many
wise.
Times.
But it's got some of that real gentleness to it. Like you're drafting and passing cards, but you're not really like messing with the other person. You're more trying to organize what you want to do and what your goals are. And so, it's a very pleasant game, and it's the art and stuff. It matches that. And so, yeah, I think we quite enjoyed it. I wasn't like blown away by any specific mechanic or anything. I just really thought it was well done and really evocative of what it was, which was dreaming about a trip that the designer wanted to make. So,
which according to Josh, he finally did.
Yay.
Apparently. So
it would be really sad if he still hadn't at this point.
I know. Yeah, it was funny talking to him about that, because that was like my one big question with him was, did you actually make it to Japan? And he goes, yeah, I did. I'm like, okay, good.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, another one that I really need to get to the table. I did not get that to the table with Allie at all, and I think that she would really enjoy it because she's always talked about going. And I just think that's, like you said, a very chill game, something that's a little bit comforting. You got a little stress in there, but it's that fun stress that you're not, terribly worried about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's got that, and I love games that do this, and I actually like making games that do this, but where you have, it doesn't, at the end of the game, like, you score up the scores, and it's fun to see who won, but you win or lose, you've built something, and you're like, but this was my trip I planned, and like, you have this real satisfaction regardless of the outcome, and I think that I really appreciate that, just that there's something really enjoyable about doing that, so...
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Now I gotta go play it this weekend. I gotta find some time. Thanks. Well, now I've got my weekend planned for me, thanks to Roberta, and we are going to chat about some other things, mostly game related, but I wanted to ask what you've been up to since we last chatted, because the last time was actually episode number 50 for me.
Wow.
It's crazy that it was that long ago because it just does not feel like October of 2022 was the last time that I had you on. It just does not feel like that at all.
Yeah, no, agreed. Where did the time go?
I know. I'm kind of worried about that, but... So what have you been up to?
I have been continuing to make games, which has just been a delight. I'm trying to think. So that would have been right before the Maple Valley Kickstarter, probably.
I think so, yeah.
And so, I've done lots of showing off Maple Valley, and then Cafe Barras, which has just been so delightful. I adore how Cafe Barras came together and how people are enjoying it. I designed Hello Kitty Day at the Park, which Maestro Media kickstarted and has been fulfilled, I believe. It's complete. And that was my first time working with like a big IP, and that was really interesting, just sort of beginning to end. I think I was sort of part way through beginning that process when we talked last, but I don't remember for sure.
Yeah, I think the last time that we talked, like shortly thereafter, you said that you had something in the works that you were going to be able to talk about soon, and that was it.
Right.
Fun mechanic, by the way, in that where you land on somebody else's space and you actually give them a high five and you both get something. I love that. It's so nice. It's such a fun little mechanic and just so heartwarming.
Oh, thanks. That was a really interesting the way that came together, because game was the first game that I worked on where they had hired developers, like Kids Table Board Games, they have sort of in-house and it's a little more low-key, but so I was actually working with John Gilmore on that, and we had gone around a few times about this is a friendly game and it's Hello Kitty and it's so lovely, and yet we've got this problem of blocking if someone's on the spot you want, and we didn't want it to feel mean, and so we came up with this, and then I believe it was John who suggested, well, make it a high five. Like, the mechanics were there, but calling it that and saying you high five the other player just made it so much better. And lots of people have commented they love that. And that was one of those things when you get to work with really smart people. It's always a delight what comes out of those collaborations.
When you have a couple of smart people in the room, bouncing stuff off of each other, that happens.
Yeah, it's delightful. So, yeah, and then I've been to so many conventions. I traveled more last year, I think, than I ever have. And I got to do some really neat things last year. The first thing I did in February last year was I have friends who invited me to go out to Michigan for a little teeny convention called Mitten Con.
Oh.
It's just like 120 people, and they rent a hotel little ballroom and play games for the weekend. And
I love that.
And it was just delightful to just hang out with friends and play games, and I wish I could afford to do it every year, but from Edmonton, everything costs a lot on the plane. But then, did some of the big shows, but also got to take part in they called it the Atom Retreat. It was a women's game design retreat that a handful of publishers put on at the Gamers Ranch in Missouri. And it was the first time they'd done it, and they really just wanted to figure out how to really sort of encourage and build capacity in women game designers specifically, because, they're saying, like, we're not getting pitches from women, like, what's going on? And I think there's lots and lots of reasons for that, but this was a really interesting attempt. And so it was a small group, but it was a really, really great weekend. And it was so fun to have, like, the atmosphere was so different than being, like, at a bigger event and just being all women. One of the things I commented on after was the first, like, 18 hours, nobody pulled out a single prototype because everyone wanted to just get to know each other first. And then once there's this little bit of trust built, then all the stuff started coming out. And it was really supportive. It was really refreshing. So
I love that.
A treat. Yeah, it was delightful. And then I got to end my year like I love at PAX Unplugged, which was great. And I didn't get horribly sick this year, so
that's a plus.
Yes, because the time before I had gotten a horrible sinus infection and just took the wind out of my sails. So yeah, and now we're gearing up for a Kickstarter with Pencil First, and then we're looking ahead to the next thing coming from Kids Table. So yeah, lots of fun stuff happening.
And speaking of those two things, those were two questions I will ask you about in a minute. But one thing with the success of everything, Creature Comforts, Maple Valley, Cafe Barras, Hello Kitty, and your other games, with that success, has that changed anything in your day-to-day life?
Well, sort of yes and sort of no. Creature Comforts allowed me to be in a position where I left my day job, which was becoming a lot of stress, and I'd been there a long time, and it was a challenge, and focus on design full time, which was amazing. And so these other things have continued with that. I've actually recently gone back to working part-time in a job that requires nothing of my brain.
Oh,
I
nice.
Literally just show up and do my job and go home, and it's perfect. Because, I mean, success is, as successful as they are, it's definitely not a way to get wealthy at all.
It's the board game industry.
Yeah, and it's been great, and I'm really lucky. But I think the thing that's really changed the most is just enough games out there that a handful of people in the board game industry know who I am. Like, it's like not like you're famous or anything particular, but I think that I get some opportunities I wouldn't have otherwise, get invited to go to conventions or do different things. And what that's meant just, I think the biggest thing is just my community has grown so much. Like, a lot of the game design and the game industry, it's quite small, as you know, and it's not that hard to get to know some really amazing people. And I think that's the biggest overall change as far as like that actually impacts. It's just that community that, when I was just starting out, I didn't really know what it was, but I felt like I was really outside of it. And then now I'm like, no, this is like, these people are great. And I can't believe how many cool people that, I get to say, that's my friend.
It's really wild, like going out to OrcaCon and that out in Seattle, that kind of reinforced that, because it was a whole bunch of people that normally I don't get to see outside of maybe 20 minutes here and there. And to be able to hang out with them and to go, to a design night or just go and grab dinner or whatever, those are the experiences that I really appreciate. And it's crazy how many people that you meet, and then when you do get that time to hang out with them, it's just so amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's chat a little bit about River Markets. That is the next installment in the Creature Comforts Maple Valley line from KTBG. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
For sure. So this is going to be Creature Comforts, while it took place over the spring, summer, fall, is really a very autumn feeling game. Maple Valley, of course, is spring. River Market is summer. And it's summer in the valley, and the critters are putting together their summer market, basically. And the mechanics of this game, I have to say, this is my favorite thing I've designed to date. And, hopefully I'll get to say that more times about other games. But it's everyone is working together to build out this market, and the buildings basically behave like a ever expanding rondel. So your critters can move a certain number of spaces all around these buildings that you've put together. And at the beginning, there's just like 4 start buildings, but then as you add, if I build a building, I put my marker on it, and then now instead of being 4 buildings big, the market is 5, or I think they're going to be like booths or stalls. They're not really buildings, but market spots. And then now if somebody comes to mind, so say I put in a stall that sells carrot juice, and they come and if they use that, sell carrots to get some money, I also get a benefit. So I might get a free carrot or whatever that is that we're doing. And so you've got this, it's competitive, but if you don't work with the other players and you built a bigger veg patch, so I'm going to build a restaurant that takes advantage of that, or it really encourages you to build off each other's stuff rather than to kind of play your own game. And so, it keeps going until a certain number till the first player is put out, depending on player count, 4 or 5 buildings, and then you sort of trigger the end. And it's really fun to come back into this space with got this great sense of place. We're thematically in Algonquin Park in Ontario, so all our animals are there, but what can we bring in that's fresh, and what can we make a nod to? And again, trying to make a game that feels familiar but fresh. And I think that River Market is going to be a little bit quicker, I think, even than Maple Valley, depending on how folks approach it, and a little bit simpler, but it's not it's definitely more complex than capybaras. It's still in that space, but yeah, I'm really, really excited to see, how folks love it and stuff, because I love it. I'm so proud of it.
Oh, I love that cooperative, kind of building that cooperative player interaction where it's not heads up and you're, being mean to everybody, something that you're kind of building jointly. You do, score your own points in that, but having that positive player interaction, those are games that I do tend to kind of gravitate towards now, especially.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't really be a cozy family game and have anything cutthroat. That just doesn't fly. As much as kids love saying pick 4 in Uno, it's not really the ambience you want. But it's really interesting because once you start using these are the rules of this world. There's going to be abundance. There's going to be no direct player conflict. We're gonna still be competing, but it's more who can work together the best rather than who can outdo the other one. There's still so much amazing space in there for interesting play. And it's funny because when we were first working on Creature Comforts, whenever Josh Capel from KTBG would come to the question, I'd be like, well, start with yes and see what happens.
Yeah.
And this kind of sort of become the mantra, say yes and see what happens, because we were really, at the beginning, we were a little nervous about abundance, about players having so much stuff. And then we realized, that doesn't actually hurt the gameplay at all. It just makes it a little different. And I think we sort of embraced that throughout this set of the games. It's just it's more what do you do with that abundance that matters, not how do you scrape up 1 carrot and then now, your donkey's starving because you don't have 2 carrots. That's a very different game than the ones we're trying to make.
Oh, that's a very good point, Roberta. And there's another game that you have on the horizon, and that's called Vineyard. That was the pencil first game that you had mentioned. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so Vineyard, a winemaking game. There's not a lot of great titles for winemaking games left, so that's what we came up with. It's going to be on Kickstarter in February, and it's a really interesting game. So this was a collaboration. From Pencil First approached me shortly after the Creature Comforts Kickstarter, and he said, hey, I've got this idea. I want a game made, and a few folks have had a crack at it, but nobody's been able to do what I want. Are you willing to give it a shot? I'm like, well, sure. Like, why wouldn't I? And specifically, he wanted a game about 4 friends working a vineyard together. Like, great. But all those 4 friends have to not be any one players. Like, I'm not playing Greta. We're all playing Greta and Thomas and Sylvie. Like, we're all playing all 4 friends. And so on your turn, you're choosing an action from your hand, and you're choosing which friend is going to take that action. And you can only do that if they can move to that place. So say you want to go and harvest grapes. They can't do that if they're already standing there. They have to move and then do the thing, and there has to be room. And so it's not cooperative in any way. Mm-hmm. It's more like this game of, again, the idea of like trying to help the most, except in this particular game, there's a lot of like getting in each other's way and really watching what other players have going. Like, you have to activate each of the 4 friends before you can activate another one a second time. So you do have this ability to watch what other players are doing and know, well, you can't use Sylvie because you used her, so I can count on her being there, or a little bit of that, trying to time it. So it's very tactical, and it ended up becoming a really interesting game, but it was definitely a really unique ask for this idea of shared workers, and it took a fair bit of it. It's an unusual mechanic, so it didn't come together right away.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I did read in the designer diary for it was the fact that it actually started life as a mobile game. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, so the artist had worked on the mobile game, and so Ed had her art for me at the very beginning, and absolutely delightful. And I think, as these things often do, sort of never entirely saw the light of day, and so he had sort of retained the rights to these ideas, and so we jumped off from there. And actually, the mechanic for cultivating and harvesting grapes, I wanted to reflect a little bit that idea of like a mini game of like a match 3 or something on your phone, or even those, those little plastic slidey puzzles when you were a kid where you had to like move little chiclet shaped bits around to redo the puzzle, like some of that, just as a nod to the roots of that. Yeah.
I will say, as far as winemaking games, I don't think Stompin' Grapes has been taken yet, so maybe that'll be like the next one that comes out.
There you go.
But you're right, it's a very limited selection that we have left. So one of the quotes that I read was you were basically talking about working on Vineyard, and you said flailing around in the game space and seeing what the game wanted to be. And I thought that was a very interesting approach to the design space. And can you talk about that a little bit?
I can. I'm not sure how much it'll enlighten you. I think that it's really easy to make a game. But it's not really easy to make a game that's right for what it wants to be, that's the right thing, and that's like got that spark or whatever. And so with my design process is like, I'll have an idea, and as much as you'd like to think that the more you practice this, eventually you can just think up a game in your head and it'll actually work. That doesn't happen very often, if ever. And so, try something, get it on the table. What are we liking? What are we not? And I'm not afraid to like completely back away and like go a completely different direction or take a whole chunk out or whatever. And so some of the initial mechanics that I started with persisted for the whole design process. But some things like just got, no, this doesn't feel right. One of the things initially was we tried to have an economy that that like you sold grapes for money and the vineyard needed money to run, and like this shared sort of pot of money that people, and it just didn't work. Like the way we think about money, it didn't, no matter how hard we tried, it was just trying to force this square peg into this round hole. And so, finally I was like, well, maybe we don't do it that way. And so I was like, oh, okay, kind of get that permission to like just tear that whole thing out, and ended up the currency in the game is personal to you, the player, even though you're not embodying any one of these friends, but you use that currency to upgrade your player board or the cards in your hand or the actions you take. And so that motivation to improve how you play the game is where the money's used. But initially, like, we wanted it to be part of like the economy of the vineyard itself. And you don't necessarily know something like that until you've sat down and tried it, right? And then you're like, oh, like this isn't producing the play that we want. And so, yeah, a lot of my games have had these absolutely delightfully brilliant false starts that people who played really early alphas will laugh. They're like, oh, I don't know.
That was something back in the day.
Right.
How far this has come.
Yeah.
It was kind of amazing because I got to see a few weekends ago, I got to see like what an actual development session looked like, because I had always been part of a play test. So a lot of that feedback is, okay, as a player, how did you feel? Thank you for your feedback. Maybe getting a little bit into doing, a little bit of work, but mostly it's, hey, this is how I felt. This worked for me. This didn't work for me. And that was that. And to be involved in seeing kind of those changes evolve and, take place, I think that makes a little bit more sense for me now. And the fact that sometimes you think something is going to work and it's going to be amazing, and then you put it out on the board and it just does not work whatsoever. And yeah, I think that was some good insight for me. And that does make a little bit more sense now.
Yeah. And it's like, you don't want people to think that like you just have an idea and magically out it comes fully formed, because, it occasionally does happen, but truthfully, usually not. Really not.
I've seen some in the time that I've been doing this, and it's just like, nope. We'll get there, but not right now.
Yeah.
So you were part of a global game jam recently that happened over a entire weekend, I believe. How did you get involved in that?
So I've always been curious about game jams. And for people who aren't familiar, it's usually a video game programmer thing where they just spend 48 hours and they make a video game. And so I'm involved with a group here called Interactive Arts Alberta that is sort of resources and advocacy for the game industry in Alberta, and they've really been kind at inviting me in to like speak at their conferences and including board game design in their umbrella of things they care about. And so when they posted that they were hosting the global game jam locally, I was like, and they, it says, analog game designers are welcome. I'm like, wow, sure, I'll show up for that. I've always been curious. And the global game jam is, as it sounds, worldwide. So on Friday afternoon at 5, they had their little brief keynote, and they revealed the theme that everyone across the world was working on games with the same theme. And then people had either come with teams or made teams when they got there, and they just got to work brainstorming and making a game. And Sunday at 5, everyone had to finish games submitted. So a very kind group of computer programmer people invited me to join them, and because no one else was really there to make board games, and I was like, that's fine, I'm here to learn. And so they asked me if I would do sound effects, and I was like, oh, I don't know how to do sound effects, but okay. And so went home and spent a good chunk of the weekend walking around my house listening to things and seeing what made the noises I want and recording them on my phone. It actually worked out pretty well. It was pretty fun. I can now tell you the difference in blowing bubbles in water and olive oil and custard.
Oh, wow.
So
things before last weekend you didn't know, you are now intimately familiar with.
That's right. Yeah, no, it was really neat, and like hats off to the programmer on our team, because yeah, there is a functioning game out there that didn't exist, Friday at 5, and now is live and people can play it, and it just blows my mind.
I love that. That is so incredibly cool that, we have these things that you can kind of get that idea. And sometimes these ideas that are kind of made during these game jams wind up being fully fledged games later on. Like they become an idea, and all of a sudden now, with a little bit of expansion, they're just a full game.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think, like, from a board game perspective, it's a perfectly great practice to just get yourself some constraints and see what you can make. And it forces you to let go of perfection and just do it and see what happens. And I think there's a lot of power in that.
I definitely agree with that. And one thing that you said earlier, Roberta, you had gone to a retreat early last year. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was getting women more involved in games in general, both from a player and an industry perspective. And these might be different answers. We've seen some strides being made, and there's always room to improve. How can we continue to work towards making things more inclusive and getting more women into the hobby?
I think that they're related very strongly in that when the audience is perceived as masculine, the games we make are aimed more at perceived masculine interests. And when people making the decisions, like the publishers and the designers, kind of broaden that and think about their target audience without such a narrow focus, and recognize that people play games for all kinds of reasons, and all kinds of people play games, and the market is way bigger than that narrow slice of, folks who want to play Scythe. Like, that's a great game, but that's not a game for everyone, and no game is for everyone. But then you get the folks making games that are either more just generally more accessible, so non-gamers can learn them quickly and then have a great time, or games with themes that aren't necessarily as gender coded, or even as themes that are like maybe considered feminine, but truthfully, like, what is that even? And I think, I've said this lots of times, I think Wingspan kind of broke the ice that way because of the demand just being so far higher than the distributors had believed, and that people had, when Jamie first talked to them, how they thought it would be, because the hunger for something different and fresh and, frankly, non-violent and beautiful was bigger than they thought. And then, you start seeing people thinking, oh, this is possible. And now we're seeing more and more games that way. But there's also the idea of, like, gatekeeping as far as like complexity goes. And I think that, women are just as likely to want to play the heavier games as guys. But I think that often the roles that women are expected to carry give them less time. And so there's something about also considering, like, well, does your audience have time to learn and play a 3-hour game? Like, maybe something that you can play shortly or after the kids are settled for the night if you're a parent, or whatever those things are. Like, I think there's just some general broadening of that, and that needs to continue. Absolutely needs to continue. And then, like, within the board game industry, I think there's a lot of like, oh yeah, I want to hear pitches from everyone, like welcome noises being made, but women often don't know how to break through and how to like do those things. And that was one of the things we talked about a lot at the women's retreat, was just like reassuring fledgling women designers, publishers need you to survive. They can't publish if they don't have a great game to publish. And so they are interested in what you have. So don't be shy to look on their website, see what their submission thing is, and do it. And like, yeah, you'll probably get said no to, but you might get said yes to, and you might get asked for more info, or you might, you never know what it'll lead to. And I think we're socialized to take less risks that way than guys are. And the truth is, there's no cost other than a bit of your time to putting together a sell sheet and emailing or filling in the web form or whatever that thing is. And just like having the courage to do that, because I think there's probably lots of women making great games that are just not confident. And like, this is me. Like, this is how I started, and I still struggle with like, is this good enough? And then you're like, oh, well, people seem to like it, so okay. So, yeah.
I think a lot of that, kind of goes back to the classic resume, right? Where a lot of guys will just put in for anything and they'll be like, oh, I deserve this. It's fine, and a lot of women will take a look at the same listing that they're qualified for, but they might not hit like one of the specified criteria. And then they just say, well, I can't apply for this. Mm-hmm. And I think, maybe taking some more chances with that, where, hey, this isn't perfect, but it's great. And, especially when it comes to pitching something with a little bit of development, some of the ideas that I've seen coming from women designers that are, I think you hit the nail on the head here. They're fantastic. And it's like, well, this isn't quite ready yet. And it's like, it's ready. You're good compared to some of the other stuff that I've seen. You're good. And one of the other things might be networking too. We were at PAX Unplugged and we went to a Board Game Besties meetup, which was a bunch of women hanging out at a hotel and just getting to know each other and chatting. And again, no prototypes were being brought out or anything. We were just getting to know each other. And I think those networking opportunities are so incredibly important as well. To get your foot in the door. You never know who is going to know who. You never know, what connection that you can make for somebody or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's incredibly important as well.
Yeah. And one of the other changes that I think we need to see more of, and we are starting, is a lot of conventions, the small conventions, are realizing like, why are there, only 20% women or whatever it is at their local con? And so they're doing things like providing a stream for kids so that, if a family can bring their children and for at least part of the day, there's like stuff their kids can be really engaged in. And like, you're going to see a different demographic when you make an effort to provide something for that demographic. And I think, not every woman is a parent and a caretaker, but a lot of women are. And there's a lot of that. Well, the guy goes to the convention and the woman stays home with the kids is still really prevalent in a lot of cases. And so if we can provide that opportunity that gets around that, and just exposes these women to those chances to network, to have those conversations with someone who might be like, oh, well, come to the game design thing, or how can we help you? How can we support you? That can lead to a lot of really good stuff.
Well, and the opportunity to have that camaraderie there as well, where, somebody might not be, showing up to a convention because they have a lack of childcare, like they need that, where they might bring a friend. If they have that childcare option, they can say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to a game convention. We should definitely go together. It would be a fun trip. But if that opportunity never shows up, neither of those women are coming either.
Yeah, exactly. And so just like wherever possible, opening those doors up and it's the same with any underrepresented group is having those conversations with them and saying, what are the barriers and how can we take them out of the way? And it's not always rocket science. Sometimes it's complex, but sometimes it's not that hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I've struggled with is getting folks to think about transit accessibility for even small events. I had a playtest group that I was like, I can't come to this because there's no transit. They're like, oh, we'll drive you. I'm like, I don't know you. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I'm not saying that you're a bad person. I'm saying we can't expect people to come out to this who don't know you when they have no, like, It needs to be, I can leave when I need to leave. Like,
Yeah.
And not understanding why that might be tells me you're not very safe. And so now this isn't a place I can invite people. Like, and it's such a small thing that if you haven't thought it through, you would never necessarily. But if you start listening to people when you ask them, there some of the things are small like that you can just, oh, well, that's not that hard.
Well, and even if it's not small, it's something that you can work towards. You can have a 2 or 3 year plan that you can then address that later on and say, all right, so we're going to start small here and then we're going to ramp up. No, yeah. I think that's very insightful.
Yeah, and it's very possible. When I first started going to FallCon, which is a Calgary game convention, and it was in 2010, because I went because of Octopus Garden winning the Canadian Game Design Award, there were probably 10% women tops at that convention. And for the last 5 or so or more years, they've been 50-50. And that was a deliberate decision to try to change that. And they also at the same time quadrupled the size of their conventions. So it was really good for them, and it's a better convention because of it. So it's very doable in a lot of cases, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of incentive and wanting to do it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of transit, let's talk about the traffic in Philadelphia, because I thought that this was something that didn't really strike me as somebody from the Midwest. We have a little bit of transit in Cleveland, but it's not great. It's okay. Yeah, we have some trains, we have a few buses, but I think where you're at, like, you very heavily rely on transit. Like, you don't see a lot of cars on the road.
I just don't have a car. There's lots of cars on the road.
Oh, there's lots of cars in the road up there? Okay.
I just rely on transit for sure.
But I think when you have public transit, one of the things that really stuck out to you was just how crowded it was in Philadelphia. Like, around the square where they were having like the Christmas market and everything. And it was just crazy. And there's still like 8 million cars trying to get in and through amongst the buses.
I didn't understand why people were taking their cars there.
Yeah.
It's just every single time we walked past it would be gridlocked. It didn't seem to matter what time of day or night.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally that section of Philadelphia. Like, I will look to avoid that at all costs. And some people just still insist on driving through there and being like, well, it's the quickest way. It's like, no, it's not.
It can't be.
Nope.
Oh, and the first year I was in Philly for PAX Unplugged, we were leaving the show and we couldn't figure out why the traffic was even heavier than usual. And we realized because in the middle of it all was the Santa Claus parade.
Yeah.
And it just made it that much more complicated.
I think Ellie got stopped by that, and she was like, they were playing Rocky for some reason. I'm like, well, that's because we're in Philly. But she was like, yeah, there was a Santa Claus parade for some reason. I got stopped up, and I couldn't make it there. And yeah, it was a whole deal.
Yeah,
it was really strange.
I've just learned to just like be glad I'm on foot.
And I think we were walking faster than the cars that were there, so that made me happy too.
Yeah.
Well, Roberta, it has been such a pleasure getting to chat with you and get to see you virtually at the very least. I don't know when we'll see each other at conventions again, but hopefully soon. Mm-hmm. Can you refresh people on what your socials are if they want to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. I am on Instagram. I am Infinite Roberta. And I'm just going to quickly pull up my Blue Sky so I don't tell you the wrong thing. Because, I have a really smart brain, but it doesn't always remember details.
Listen, sometimes social media is not the first priority. I'm just saying.
I'm Roberta Taylor on Blue Sky. So, yeah, and those are the two that I use the most for anything board game related.
So you can go check her out on there. Again, Roberta, thank you so incredibly much for taking the time to sit down with me again. It is always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you too. It's always a delight, and I had a great time chatting.
And if you need to get a hold of me on my socials, you can go to the website at cardboardtime.com. My Instagram and Blue Sky is at cardboardtime. Discord's on the Tabletop Express server. You can always email me at cardboardtime@gmail.com or go to the website for an invite to that. And as always, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you around the table in 2 weeks for another episode of Cardboard Time.